Welcome. My name's Chris Oughton, yes, and I'm the Director at Kwinana Industries Council, and today we're going to go on a tour of the Western Trade Coast. There's a few things that I'd like to just hand out to you in advance of us doing that. And just for the record, I think you're tour number 220 over the last 3 years. Now this is the first thing I'd like to hand to you. It's the 2019-20 Kwinana Industries Council annual report. You can take that away with you and perhaps read it on the plane going home. And the second thing is this map of the Western Trade Coast. What we're going to be doing today is start in the Quinana town centre where we are now, and we're going to travel across towards the coast, and then we're going to have a look at the Rockingham Industry Zone, take a look at the various coastal facilities along the way. We'll drive up through the old Kwinana Industrial Area core, which is the yellow area. We'll jump out on one of the beaches along here where the possible new port's going to be going. Then we'll carry on up the coast through the Australian Marine Complex, and then we're going to go down through this blue area which is called Latitude 32, and then around through this area which is known as Mandogalup, and it's all inside our buffer zone. Have a look through what this green area means, and then back through to the Kwinana town centre. All right then, let's go on the tour. Follow me. And as you can see, we've organised a very nice day for you today. There we go. All right, so we'll head off over to the car now. It's just down the stairs up here. The tour's going to take a couple of hours. It'll be pretty full on. There's a lot of talking that I need to do. Feel free to ask any questions along the way. The more questions, the better, really. And I'll endeavour to tailor the tour to the sorts of questions you're asking. Now, just be careful, the steps here are very steep. And you'll see my car over there, just there. It's got the number plate Outie. That's my old school nickname, by the way. And so, okay, buckle in, and we're off. So we're leaving we're in the Kwinana city centre zone. Our office is up to the left here, as you know. We're going to head down basically onto the main road and then across to the coast. What I talk about with people on the way to the industrial area is what does Kwinana Industries Council do? Well, we're an industry association, like a Chamber of Commerce, and we exist to serve the collegiate interests of the members. So we have 14 what I call full members and another 20 or so associate members. There's a big difference between the two, but we're 100% two groups, but we're 100% funded by our members. KIC was incorporated in 1991, so we've been around for a day or two. Now, we operate with trying to resolve 6 key strategic issues. I won't go through them now, but I'll talk about them on the tour as we're going through. One thing I do like to talk about now is, you remember the schematic that I showed you? On the back of that is setting out the industrial symbiosis of the companies in the industrial area. Now that's important because industrial symbiosis is what assists with making companies be internationally competitive. And the schematic that you just saw sets out about 150 exchanges between the companies, and they are products and byproducts and utilities like power and water and so forth, steam and so forth. That's one of the legs. Imagine a chair with 4 legs. That one of the legs for this my definition of industrial symbiosis is the product and byproduct exchanges, and that's what the world talks about when it
refers to industrial symbiosis, but I've got three other parts that I talk about. The first one is the skilled workforce symbiosis. Now I'll come to that later, but there's 30,000 workers that attribute their jobs to the industrial area, direct and indirect. The second symbiosis is the secondary industry belt that exists primarily to serve, provide services and products into the industrial area. Don't worry about that beeping, that's lane departure alert, that'll happen a bit. And the fourth symbiosis is governance. Now I'll go into that again. Now we've just entered the buffer zone, and as you can see both sides of the road there's bush, which is great because this bush is reserve and can't be reduced. So this is one of the strongest areas of the buffer zone that we have, and it's essentially impossible for residential encroachment to be an effect. So we don't have to worry about this area, but we have got three other main areas that we do need to worry about, and buffer stability is a very important aspect. Now you can see how wide the buffer is. We're still travelling towards the coast at this point, and as we come around the hill, you'll see a railway line in the distance and some industries, and there's a nice big couple of cranes there indicating that there's some heavy lifting going on. Now the cranes, those buildings, that's where the secondary industry belt that I talked about as that third leg of the industrial symbiosis, that's part of that, but it's the eastern front of it. Now with a bit of luck we won't get stuck with a train passing. No, that's good. Okay, now we're going to head a little bit south here, and head into the green, the lighter green area on that map that I showed you, and that's this area here. Now that's the Rockingham Industry Zone, and we're at the north-eastern corner of the Rockingham Industry Zone at the moment. We might give way to this very large truck coming at us. So now the Rockingham Industry Zone, as you'll see, looks quite, as we pass various parts of it, you'll see it looks empty, devoid of industrial development, and that's because it is at this stage, but that's soon to change quite dramatically. My understanding is that there's only about 4 or 5 20 hectare lots left. I think there's about 800 hectares in here. The land is owned by the state government, it's administered by Development WA, and they either lease the land if it's in the heavy industry half, which is the northern half, or they sell the land, which is general industry, in the southern half. Now, as we go along here across, you can see that there's very little development going on, and that's, like I said before, so most of the land in here is allocated, whether that is to being leased or sold. Now if we look immediately to the left, we'll see that there's a brand new fence gone up. That is the site that's being cleared at the moment for Australia's second waste to energy plant. The first one we'll see a bit later on in the tour over towards the north. So we've got both of Australia's waste to energy plants. So that's where the material that you put in your garbage bin to go to the tip each week actually goes and is under high temperature combustion process is converted to electricity, which is, for me, I think is a terrific use of a waste product. Now I'm going to pull over here just for a minute and talk about what we have in front of us. It's a bit of traffic around. I just wanted to talk about Nickel West to you. So Nickel West is a company that is owned by BHP. It produces nickel for the international metals market. The really interesting thing about Nickel West is that it's doing very well now, and in the past it hasn't been doing so well for quite a long time. It's now producing a nickel sulfate product. Nickel sulfate is used in the manufacture of lithium batteries. In fact, there's more nickel in a lithium battery than there is lithium. Not many people know that. It's going to be producing, that plant's being commissioned at the moment. So that's really good news for Lithium Valley. Now, the Lithium Valley is a phrase that industry has coined for the metals and associated materials that companies that will be making those products for lithium battery cells. So this area, Rockingham Industry Zone, and you saw that there's a lot of bush on that in Rockingham Industry Zone, but a lot of new industry will be coming out of the ground over the next 18 months to 2.5 years. They're pretty much all in the lithium value chain space. Nickel West has got another 2 production trains of nickel sulfate under planning. The first one, which is about to be commissioned, or it's in commissioning, is producing 100,000 tonnes of nickel sulfate. Now, I think we'll keep going. I've caught up, and we'll just continue heading on down south. Okay, now we're heading down to the southern end of the western trade coast, and over on the left, as we're passing, you'll see some roadworks, and in front of us, this is roadworks that are setting up for the opening up of the Rockingham Industry Zone. The land over on the right is where the 2 further nickel sulfate trains will be going. Talking about the lithium industries that are coming in here, and new energy industries as well. So I'll just list them off. There's a couple of high purity alumina companies. There's a manganese sulfate, a cobalt sulfate. There's a couple of graphite, and I think one graphene company. There's a company looking to come here that will be turning natural gas into gasoline. There's a company that's looking to produce liquid hydrogen for export, and that is will be using renewable energy to split water into hydrogen and oxygen. Over on this area here, we're talking to a company called Oswald that could well be coming here to set up a lithium battery cell manufacturing plant. And if it does, that'll be something like 30 hectares of factory under one roof, and with a solar array on the top. So fingers crossed we get that company embedded into this area over here. Now looking ahead, we see what's actually, the lights have turned orange, so that's useful. So we see buildings, car yards, bulk goods warehousing, and so forth. So that is an ideal use, commercial use, for the periphery of the buffer zone. Why is that important? Well, it stops industry getting too close to the residential development that's on the other side, but it also stops the residential development from encroaching up towards closer and closer to industry. Now that's important because as residential area gets closer to industry, it constrains industry. Industry is less inclined to spend money redeveloping their site, and so forth. So what happens is that if we get a constraint on industry, we also get a diminishing of the development of industry. Now there is a buffer issue in the south part here. In Rockingham we are now, and there's been long-term plans to have some apartment buildings in what is currently zoned light industrial, have that rezoned to city centre, and that enables high-rise apartment buildings. Now that's, for us, for industry, that's a really bad thing. So we've been opposing that probably for about 8 years now. We're going to take, at the next intersection, we're going to take go west over towards the coast, but this land in front of us and on the east side is where these apartment buildings would go if this happened, when we obviously sincerely hope it doesn't happen. So we're going to head west now. The houses that are directly in front of us now are outside of the buffer zone. So the buffer zone finishes on this road. That parkland is inside the buffer, these houses are outside of the buffer. Now these houses currently are getting, in certain weather conditions, decibels, noise, a little bit higher than what the maximum allowable is. So it would be very silly to reduce the buffer or to bring these houses closer to industry because the noise increases. And there's also cumulative risk around catastrophic release of certain chemicals, and these people could be affected if that were to occur. So buffer zones, if the message from this part of this tour is protect the buffer zones, then that's why we protect the buffer zones. Now, straight ahead of us is the Stirling Naval Base. That's where the Navy ships are housed. There's a lot of contractors working on that site, but it's set to double in the next few years. So there's going to be a lot of Navy defence activity. I think there's some of that is with the American and British navies as well. Now, up ahead of us is a big blue building that you see. That's the grain terminal for CBH. It's the largest grain terminal in the southern hemisphere, by the way. Now, these houses, as we're getting closer to industry, it's interesting that these houses are outside of the buffer zone, yet we're getting closer than we were before to industry. So there's some strange alignments of the buffer here. Over to the left, we can see the CBH grain terminal. There's a ship being loaded with probably wheat destined for international markets. Now, that's a very busy grain terminal. And as we pass the water here, you'll see some black dots in the water. Those are the buoys for the mussel farm holding the ropes up. There's 3 mussel farms in Coburn Sound, and that means that Coburn Sound must be very good quality water, otherwise we couldn't eat the mussels out of there. The problem with the mussel farm, just out of interest, is that the guy who runs them is moving all of the mussel farming to Albany, because when the snapper are spawning in Coburn Sound now, there's so many that they can strip 10 tonnes of mussels off his ropes at night. Now we've got a good view of the CBH jetty. Now you see this alignment just here where the fences change. That's where the buffer changes. So there's no buffer at all for CBH. There doesn't seem to be any issues now, but there were noise issues going back quite a few years, but they've been resolved. Part of it was the hull, the hatches, big steel hatches on the ships being slammed down, different weather patterns. If you've got an inversion layer because of cloud, the noise can vibrate around. Now I do go faster here because there's a lot to say. Now directly ahead of us you see some bush. That it's not really bush, it's sort of regrowth. Well, there used to be a township there called Kwinana Beach, and I think it was in the 70s, mid-70s, that the government purchased all of the houses and raised them, flattened them, got rid of them, and so that's now land available for industry. And sometimes there's parts along here that you can actually see the driveway or the road network that passes. It's still visible to see from air. There's one just here. This is actually the original road network through the place. Now this has already been starting to be developed already, and there's more to come. Part of the Lithium Valley companies will be in here as well. Now we're coming up to a park. It's called Wells Park. We'll go in there and we'll take a look at what's down on the shore. Wells Park is a public park. Now, industry doesn't like having public parks in an industrial area. It's not that we don't like the park. It's like it's about what we don't like the purpose of the park being, and that is a place for people to gather, families, and they come here to recreate, barbecues, fishing. There's a little boat launching ramp, nice facilities. But these people are in a dangerous place. So directly ahead of us, you can see a couple of ships being loaded. There's dangerous chemicals that are loaded and unloaded, imported and exported from this jetty. And we can see lots of people around. There's some ships offshore, and I'll just park here and I'll give you the story. Okay, so we're parked now in Wells Park and we're facing Kwinana Bulk Jetty, KBJ it's called. It's a Fremantle Ports facility, 2 berths. 75,000 tonne ships. There's one that's being unloaded at the moment, unloading fertiliser, and we'll see some trucks going backwards and forwards from time to time if we sit here long enough. That's actually the ship being unloaded. If we look out to sea, there's a number of ships berthed out in the channels and areas, and I can see about 6 or 7 of them out there. They're incurring what is called demurrage. Now, demurrage is essentially parking fees for ships waiting to be unloaded, and that can cost sometimes $15,000 to $20,000 US a day. So it's a very important cost of the berthing and unloading or loading process. It's got to be minimised. So why is that important? Well, the jetty itself is running at about 80% capacity. That means it's pretty busy, and the busier it gets beyond that, the more demurrage will be occurring. So operating that sort of port operation, the operator wants to minimise the demurrage, but keep it as busy as possible. So that's what's occurring there. I would say that's a constraint on industry. If we had another berth, a third berth, and there's been one planned off and on for many, many years, but it hasn't happened, it's probably due to the government not allocating the capital to the Fremantle Port Authority to build the jetty. But you know, with all of the boats out here, you can see that it's necessary. Now, we've got people fishing around the place. On a weekend in the summertime, there could be 100 people here, quite easily 100 people here. And what happens if if there's an accident with the dangerous chemicals being unloaded from that ship? Well, what do the people do? They don't really know what to do. We've got a safety process in place, and there's notices around, but when something happens, the ship has to blast its horn, and basically the signs say for people to get out of it and head south to Rockingham, which is where the grain past where the grain terminals were. There's a bit of local knowledge around the place. The concrete structure in front of us, where the people are fishing down the end, there's a little metal structure sticking out, rusty metal. That's actually the bow of the SS Kwinana, the steamship. It was wrecked here. Just for that local knowledge, Kwinana means pretty maiden, and there's a sign here in the park that gives the story for that. So we'll leave the park now, and we'll head on up through the yellow part of the industrial area, the old industrial core. So Wells Park, busy little place, and you know my thoughts on parks, public parks in industrial areas, but it's here to stay. So be it. Now we'll continue on our journey northwards once we get out of here. Okay, so on our left is some land that is available for lease. There's not much left in the Kwinana Industrial Core. On our right is the Puma Energy Tank Farm under construction. That's going to be a very big facility when it's finished. Directly ahead of us is the western profile of Nickel West, and you can see towards the south where the crane is, that's where the nickel sulfate production facility is under construction. So what have we got here now? Well, we've got Coogee Chemicals directly ahead of us on both sides. That's those tanks. They purchase their fuel wholesale from the Bhp Oil Refinery and wholesale that out to all of the service stations around the place. So very busy. Over here we have a couple of bitumen plants. They import the bitumen, and that's what's used for our road construction and so forth. They're relatively new entrants into the industrial area, and of course they're welcome. The railway line we can see over on this side is the single line into and out of the industrial area. The line is operating at 80% capacity, which means if you can get another slot for a new train of new goods delivery, congratulations, but you probably won't get another one. Now, just over here you'll see some strange looking vessels. Well, they're called isotainers. They contain some very dangerous chemicals, and Coogee store those safely for industry. They come in through Fremantle and they're stored here for use. Some of them are quite aggressive catalysts used in chemical processing plants around this area. Where we're heading for now, past the two bitumen plants, one being Sammy and the other being Puma bitumen, is to where we saw KBJ before, the Quinana jetty that was unloading those two ships. Well, there's those ships straight ahead. We're going to turn around here and we'll move out, but over on that side you can see some of the storage sheds that Fremantle ports have. Now, the company that we're looking at here is CSBP, part of the West Farmers Group. They started off as a cooperative producing fertiliser for the wheat belt and surrounds and out into the agricultural areas, but many years ago they branched out into other production of other chemicals for industry, such as ammonium nitrate, which is, yes, it's a fertiliser, but it's also a blasting agent used to bring on mine sites for the drilling and blasting. There is a gold reagent, which is the sodium cyanide. That's exported as well, not just exported into the wheat belt or the mining areas rather, but also overseas, and it's exported in shipping containers. About 1,800 shipping containers a year go out through Fremantle. That's sodium cyanide. Lots of trucks around crossing the single railway line, and I do harp that's actually one of the key constraints, key strategic issues for us to resolve, is the increasing the capacity in the railway line. If a train comes in at the moment, it has to go out the same way. It has to reverse out. One way in, same way out. What we want to do is make it one way in, different way out. Now, you'll notice that the gardens around here are very well maintained, manicured, I would say. There's a reason for that, and the owner of Coogee Chemicals has famously told me that it's his wife who insists. She's a horticulturalist. She insists that the gardens are very well maintained. So, of course, therefore they are. This side of the road on my right is what I called that. Remember the third synergy I spoke about, the secondary industry belt. So the secondary industry belt includes industries that could be advanced fabricators or constructors. So some of the kit that you see, some of the buildings, the advanced engineering workshops for the maintenance of these facilities, also labour hire, plant hire, that sort of thing. So there are part of those, the 30,000 workers that attribute their jobs to the industrial work in the secondary industry belt. So we're coming up now to a fairly major intersection. We're going to go west into the industrial. If we look over here, we will see a company called Chlor Alkali. That company makes essentially chlorine for industry. Chlorine's a very aggressive chemical used in stripping down other chemicals. So that's an important part of industry, very integral into the industrial symbiosis chain. And around here on our right is a company called New Farm. They were doing it pretty tough there for a while. They supply agricultural chemicals into the Australian agricultural scene. Things are picking up now because the drought on the east coast is over. Over on this side we see Tronox. Tronox recently acquired a company called Crystal. They make titanium dioxide, and titanium dioxide is used as it's a white pigment, also exported in containers out through the inner harbour at Fremantle. It's used in things like toothpaste and paint and so forth. Now on this side we have Bock gases. Now if you drink fizzy drink, beer or soft drink, the bubbles come from here. The CO2 comes from here, and then they get a lot of their CO2 from CSBP, as it was a waste stream, and that's another symbiotic relationship. We're now crossing our single railway line again, and heading deeper and deeper into the core. Now what we see directly ahead of us here is the Bhp Production Facility where the green stacks are, and the tank farm, which is where obviously where the fuel's stored. This is the entrance to Tronox. We're not going in, we're just going to take a little diversion down this very little known road to a company that's run by the Water Corporation, and it's called the Kwinana Wastewater Reclamation Plant, or QWERP. QWERP exists to provide very, very high quality water to the neighbouring heavy industries, and it gets its water from Woodman Point, except it's not actually directly from Woodman Point. Woodman Point sends its wastewater right down the length of the Western Trade Coast and out through the back of Garden Island. It's called the Sepia Depression Ocean Outfall Line. So this little place here makes about 6 million litres of water a day for industry, and as I say, it's very high purity water, and it's great because it's recycled water. There's plans to increase the production in there, and I think that's probably due to happen anytime soon. Good view of the operations of Tronox, and Tronox, one of the key industries in the industrial area, and also a key industry in the industrial symbiosis chain. Now, interestingly, they make a product, titanium dioxide, which has a byproduct of steam. Steam is required at the chlor-alkali plant, which makes the chlorine, which is next door. I showed you that just before, next door. And so chlor-alkali make the chlorine for the Water Corporation to put into our drinking water. So you can see how interconnected they are. Now we're going to move further into the core. There's a fair bit to get through in here, a fair bit happening. We have a waste accepting business here called Cleanaway. There was a fire here just recently. You can see the building there. There was a fire. It was well contained, and there were no dangerous emissions, and the Department of Fire and Emergency Services did a very good job in containing it. Now on this side we have the last remaining large block of land, 75 hectares in the Kwinana Industrial Area, has been allocated to a company called Covalent Lithium. This will be our second lithium hydroxide plant once it gets going. It's in its very early stages, only just going through the planning approvals processes at the moment. So there's a fair way to go, and it will be, as I say, it will be the second. Now I'll show you a little bit later on in the tour where the first one is, and that is called Tianchi. It's just over here, but we'll get a better look at that later. Now the land directly ahead of us is owned by the Fremantle Port Authority, Fremantle Ports, and it is a very large flat area that's used for storing bulk materials like iron ore or bauxite for export, and it arrives by rail, tips into a bottom dumping shed, goes up onto a stacker, and makes the windrows in preparation for being loaded out onto the ships. So this operation's been around for quite a long time. The orange material that you see at the moment is bauxite. The jetty that services this area at the end is called Kbt Coronaval Terminal. It has a shallower draft for the ships and is restricted to 55,000 tonne ships. So it's also operating at 80% capacity or thereabouts, which means that it pretty much can't get any busier. So we list this also as a constraint on industry. It does need an injection of capital, whether that's for extending the jetty to say 2 berths, or potentially it could be deepening the berths, and it could be for replacing the equipment, the cranes that you can see on the jetty. So you heard me talking before about the Westport project, the government's Westport project. That is drawing to a conclusion. The task force has made its recommendations to the minister, and the minister is considering when that report will be released. So in essence, what the report is recommending is the deindustrialisation of the inner harbour, which is the containers and break bulks, to bring it down from Fremantle to Kwinana. And it's assessed all of the options between Fremantle and Kwinana and Bunbury. Bunbury is not an option, and the report says that remaining in Fremantle is not an option. So the new port will happen in Kwinana. The real question is, over what period of time does that transition occur? Industry says it should be sooner rather than longer term, and I'll talk about why that is shortly. The configuration that industry prefers is the land-backed configuration. So that means basically from this fence line in front of us all the way north to the Alcoa Alumina exporting jetty, which is a couple of kilometres, is for the new port. And it would extend out land back, but it would be a reclamation somewhat further out into Coburn Sound and then extend further north. The width of that is yet to be determined, and Westport are currently doing more study work and so forth on that. Because we've just got the one jetty here, it's like it's just one jetty. We actually believe that it should be a number of jetties over time, because it's a constraint on industry. It's got a very big land-backed area, so it can support the storage of more materials either imported or exported, but it's constrained firstly by the rail getting to it and the pace at which ships can be loaded and unloaded. And remember, there's only one berth. So my view is that the Westport process is now has rightly considered expanding it. It's expanded its scope to rightly consider what goes on with Kbt Coronaval Terminal and its environs. Now, one of the advantages of increasing the number of berths for ships is that we could bring in the spodumene concentrates for secondary processing within the Kwinana Industrial Area. So what that means is it's like exporting bauxite or iron ore. They're products that have no value added to them, they're just exported. What I'm talking about is bringing in those sorts of products to be processed here so that the value is added. I mean, for example, Coburn cement import clinker. Now that's a pretty basic product, but what's it used for? Well, it's used in the manufacture of cement. So that means that it's a product that's brought in to add value. If we can bring in more products and set up the processes to add the value, we are creating a downstream processing industry. And to be honest, Western Australia really does need to get itself better equipped and better able to be able to do more downstream processing, because it creates far more jobs and it adds a lot of economic activity into the state's economy. Right, let's head now through around some of these new industries that are coming in, and then we'll go into where the new port could actually be sited, a place called Barter Beach, which isn't actually a public beach, but we'll get into that a little bit later on. So you can see the Bhp Oil Refinery to the right. That's the production facility for it. Ahead of us, over to the right, we have a little energy company in here that produces electricity for BP, and it gets its fuel source as the waste products from BP, and they're also exporting electricity into the grid. So that's another set of synergies that is occurring now. Directly ahead of us, is the Tianchi lithium hydroxide plant. This will be, I think it's the world's biggest lithium hydroxide production facility. It's huge. It's a great story. We'll see more of the kit on the other side, and we'll park up and you'll see that. So Air Liquide directly ahead of us, another company producing industrial gases for industry around the state. You can see 3 cylinders. They're actually the concrete buns for the Lpg production facility. Now, LPG is produced from the gas in the pipeline, the LNG that comes down from Dampier all the way to Bunbury. So they're making a lot of industrial gas for power generation, but also for domestic consumption. You can see how big that site that's been allocated to Covalent is. We've been driving along. It's probably 600 or 800 metres long. It's a big site. As I say, it's the last big remaining site in the Kwinana Industrial Area, and that means, therefore, that we need to find new, additional, heavy land zoned suitable for heavy industry. And I'll talk about that when we come into the Latitude 32 area a little bit later on in the tour. Now we're going into turning left here across the railway line. This is a railway line that feeds the Fremantle Port the Fremantle Port's bulk storage area. I get a little bit tongue-tied sometimes because I've got a lot to say. Over here, the little blue thing is the Perth Energy. That's a peaking power station. It produces electricity when it's really needed. The little building over here you see is called BMT company. It produces mercury that you can hold in your hand. Obviously don't do that now, but it's taking the waste stream from the oil and gas industry way up north, which has mercury as one of its nasties in the product stream. They take it out. It's in a liquid in a fluid. It comes here and is through a chemical process. The mercury is recovered and it's sent to industry. Now, both sides of the road here are small blocks of land that would be available for lease to companies coming into the strip. The company directly ahead of us here is Sims Metal. Sims accept and source metal, scrap metal from around the state. They sort it into different metal type piles, and then they shred it and it's exported out through Fremantle. So that's another, you can see some trucks in there. There's a lot of truck movements between here and Fremantle for scrap metal being exported. They moved here on the basis, about 5 years ago, on the basis that the new port would be built and they could get a rail siding to the port. So they're very keen, like many industries are, to have the new port built in Quinana. We're running up parallel to the main line that comes into the industrial area now, and there'll be a better view of that as we go over a bridge a bit further on. So to our left and straight ahead we see, and I'll pull over here to give you a good view, we see the Tianchi lithium hydroxide plant, and there's some really interesting stories to be told about this. So I'll just pull over here and tell you them. Oh, here comes a train. That's a bauxite train going back to fill up again. Okay, and I'll stop the car. So all of the kit, which is the construction that you can see, about 80% of it was made within 5 kilometres of here. And that's a terrific story of local content. It tells the world, because the world's watching Tianchi, it tells the world that the secondary industries, the secondary industries in the Kwinana Industrial Area in the Western Trade Coast can produce top quality equipment for very advanced chemical processing plants. Now, that's a showcase, and it's really important for the state that it demonstrates that it can produce this equipment. So local jobs, local content, good story. Now we'll see where all of that kit came from soon. Tianchi has two waste streams. The first is, so imagine that there's a truckload of their spodumene concentrate arrives from the mine. 4 or 6% of what's in that truck is actually the final product. So the 94 or 96%, checking my maths, of what was in that truck is going to become a byproduct. What do you do with that? Well, you can truck it all the way back to the mine, or you can separate it and find markets for it. So let's talk about it. There's two main products coming out of Tianchi, byproducts. One is a product that you can use in the manufacture of concrete. Well, in the industrial area, there are concrete manufacturers, tilt-up panels, for example. So that byproduct stream is sold, could be sold to the concrete tilt-up panel manufacturer as an ingredient into their concrete. What about the other one waste stream I just spoke about? Well, if you look right over in the distance, you see a little beige roof. When you get close to it, it's not that little. That's Coburn cement. They make cement. The other byproduct that Tianchi produces is used in the manufacture of cement. And I believe there's an arrangement in place that Coburn Cement is going to purchase Tianchi's waste stream for that process. How good's that? So that is an example of industrial symbiosis triggered when a new company comes into the industrial area. But the story doesn't end there. There's some cranes over in that direction you'll see on the skyline. That's the second waste to energy plant that I was talking about. Well, it's actually the first one because it's well under construction. One of its byproducts is also an ingredient in the manufacture of cement. So guess where that's their fly ash and bottom ash. Guess where that's going? To Coburn Cement, literally over the road. Their other major byproduct is electricity, because the process generates electricity through boilers. It makes steam by recovering the heat, the energy, makes steam, turns turbines and produces electricity. Well, my understanding is that Tianchi is going to be acquiring that electricity, or a good proportion of that electricity. The rest will go onto the grid, but there's another synergy. So 4 synergies, because one new company is coming to the industrial area, and it makes the waste to energy company, which is Avitas, it makes them more viable because one of their waste products is an input into a utility into another company. So I've taken a fairly long story there, but that's industrial symbiosis at work. And I talk about it in a horticultural sense. So you've got this orchard with low-hanging fruit, mid-hanging fruit, and high-hanging fruit. And all these exchanges are based on commercial realities, so they have to work. Financially, they have to work. So the low-hanging fruit gets picked quite easily. That's the easy synergies, and the medium hanging fruit when the time's right. The high-hanging fruit stays there, never gets picked, because it's just commercially unviable. But when a new company like Tianchi comes in, we get a new season of flowering, so we get a new season of fruit, and we get new low-hanging fruit to pick. That's the analogy I use, and people seem to get that. All right, let's keep going, shall we? Directly on my right, which I should have pointed out, is the Quanada Motorplex. It's a speedway. It was put there many, many years ago, 15, 18 years, maybe 20 by now. We don't like it because it's constraining industrial development. There could be 10,000 people there, and if there's an industrial accident, a spillage of some sort, catastrophic release, how do those people get out in time? So I'll leave that question hanging, but it shouldn't be put there. Now we're going to move to Barter Beach. I spoke to you a little bit earlier about. Barter Beach is where the new port in Kwinana would be located if Westport's recommendations are ultimately taken up. There's a good view of the waste to energy plant directly on my right at the moment. Pretty good view. We're approaching straight ahead. You can see, if you look through some of the gaps, you'll see the orange. That's the bauxite that we were on the other side of before. You can see how extensive that land is as the laydown area behind the Quinana Motorplex Terminal. Coburn Cement on our left over there. They've just been approved for an expansion which is about $120 million worth. So they're here for the long haul, which is great to see. Good long-term stable member of Kwinana Industries Council. So here's the waste to energy plant. We're getting nice and close to it now. It's going to go twice as high as it already, as you can see, it already is there. So, and it's going to go quite a bit further eastwards. A big facility. Like I said before, it's the first one in Australia. There's about 1,400 of them around the world. I had the pleasure of visiting Tokyo several years ago to see waste to energy plants, and I saw 4. 2 of them were in built up areas with residents directly living literally over the road from these facilities. They have very advanced chemical scrubbing in the emission stacks and very, very high temperature combustion, so combustion is complete. It's not an alternative to recycling, so we've got to keep doing our recycling, but it's going to take out the materials that we send to a landfill. A landfill basically is the worst thing you can do with rubbish, because it's a legacy. It makes methane for years and years and years. So anyway, I'm a great supporter, as you can tell. As we cross here, this is actually the road reservation on both sides for the road that would go into the new port, and it goes all the way up to Rockingham Road. We'll go there later on and I'll show you in reality what that means. But the pipe manufacturers here, these concrete lined steel pipes don't need to be manufactured in an industrial core, and there's a fairly rubbishy industry over on this side. It's not heavy, it's not dirty, it's not noxious. It doesn't need to be here. So I've been encouraging Westport to start negotiations to move them to an area that is far more suitable, and I'm pretty sure that's progressing. Anyway, they'll have to be compulsorily acquired if the port's coming down here. Now, directly ahead, there's a whole lot of electricity generation infrastructure. You see 2 large chimneys, there's 2 smaller chimneys to the back, and there's 2 stumpy looking chimneys here, stacks. The big stacks is where the Synergy power station that up until 5 years ago was burning coal. There's no coal burnt in the Kwinana Industrial Area for energy, for electricity production. It's all gas, and that's what those stumpy looking stacks are doing, the 4 of them. They are power production facilities using gas. Now, the company that's directly ahead of us, this little building, this is the Perth seawater desalination plant. About 15% of Perth's drinking water comes from here, and it's drawn from in Coburn Sound and goes through a reverse osmosis process and is pumped back in. Now, there's a conflict with the new port because their intake and outflow infrastructure is where the port's going, so something's got to give. So that'll work its way out. There'll be an engineering solution that's worked out when the port ultimately does come here. Now, again, directly ahead of us, you can see the orange stuff, the bauxite. That's again another view of the laydown area that is available to support an expanded Kbt Coronaval Terminal. It's a very big area. So now we're heading into Barter Beach. Barter Beach, the Union, the MUA and the Fish Army call a public beach and a horse beach. The fact is that it's neither. Horses use it, but that doesn't make it a horse beach, and people swim here doesn't make it a public beach. It's a beach in an industrial area that is owned by the state government to the high water mark. People can use the beach, horses can use the beach, but it's actually not designated, it's not registered or zoned for recreation. It's industrial land. Looking to the south, we can see the other side of Kwinana Bulk Terminal. At the Kwinana Bulk Terminal, you can see a couple of tugboats that have been pushing in that ship to berth it so it can unload. When I spoke about the reclamation, it starts here. It starts from Kwinana Bulk Terminal and goes all the way up the beach to the Alcoa jetty. It's about 2 kilometres. How far out the reclamation would go? Well, there's the channel right out there. Now, you can see a little bird down on the foreshore here, and I like to include the story if I see one. That's quite a rare bird. It's called a tern. In fact, it's called a left-hand tern. The reason they're called left-hand terns is because they do little circles anti-clockwise. So you've had a bit of a treat today, the left-hand turn. Way in the distance is the Australian Marine Complex. You can see a very large building and a not so large building. The Australian Marine Complex is the defence industry and shipbuilding maritime industry hub, the Australian Marine Complex. We're going to go for a drive through there a little bit later on. Now that area is also on a reclamation and it's full. So what I've been saying is that when we're talking about the freight task moving to this area from Fremantle, we should also be talking about the expansion of the Australian Marine Complex to accommodate the extra shipbuilding and ship maintenance and defence industry activity that we know is coming. There's probably going to be some quite significant announcements about that in the not too distant future. Over here is the old Bhp Export Facility. It's a jetty, it's been around for a very long time. It's derelict and probably in the Westport process will be demolished because it will be where the reclamation is. And incidentally, this area here, Barter Beach, was where a private port was going to be built. It was going to take trade, break bulk trade, which is like cars or sheep or livestock or whatever, it's scrap metal. And it was stage 1 of a private port. Stage 2 was to be further south. It got this area, the stage 1 got all of its environmental approvals, and this, I'm going back probably 18 to 20 years now. But it never progressed, and there's a whole lot of reasons for that, to do with other proposed ports from the state government, and there were problems with stage 2 being too close to one of the industries. So it got too complicated, and it didn't eventuate. But the point I want to make is that it had all of its environmental approvals through the EPA. So that's pretty much it for this area. We'll now head north and go to what is the second public beach, called Challenger Beach, not Barter Beach, because it's not a public beach. Okay, got that? Oh, and look what we can see. Here comes one of these horses that don't know that it's not a horse beach, but that's okay. We won't get in its way. Directly ahead of us, over the top of that roof ahead of us, you can see some power pylon, the top of a power pylon. That signals where Ankertel Road intersects with Rockingham Road, and that's important because Ankertel Road from the east will be the major freight route that comes in over Rockingham Road and down into the port, right through to the dock. So the trucks will be able to come off Ankertel Road. That's wide loads, high wide loads, dangerous goods, road trains. They will be able to come onto the dock directly and be loaded or unloaded and head out the same way right across to the Tonkin Highway, which means then they can head north up to Kewdale or south down to the southwest, Australand and so forth. That would be the new Perth freight link. There's a whole lot of politics around whether it should be north of here as an extension of the Royal Highway or whether it should be down here at Ankertel Road. Logically, it would be at Ankertel Road if the freight task from Fremantle moves to Kwinana. You wouldn't do Row 8 if the justification for it was for the freight trucks to get to the port. If the port moves here, the freight route should also move south. So that's what I'm saying. That needs to be re-looked at, and Westport have been doing a good job at that. So now we're heading out of the industrial core, and when we go, there's a bridge up here. When we go over the bridge, I'd like you to take a look to the left or the right, and you'll see how complex, or the complexity that's down there. That's the rail lines and pipeline corridors. Pipeline corridors are the arteries for the symbiosis projects, exchanges. I just got to be a bit careful. There's a few trucks ahead of us here. So remember, have a look over, and you can see the complexity. Now we've also got where directly ahead of us is the Alcoa Refinery, but to the left here are the pipeline corridors. You think, as I do, well, they're pretty vulnerable to a truck running off the road or something like that, and it would be quite catastrophic if that happened, because there's some quite important chemicals for the state that are in those pipelines. So pipeline governance, when I spoke about the fourth synergy being governance, pipeline governance falls under that category, and there needs to be a better management of the pipeline corridors. Now that's the state government's department, or which is called Development WA. It's very complex. There are leases, easements, private property, public property. The whole thing is far too complex, to the point where sometimes rather than running the synergy, the product between the companies through the pipeline, which would be the highly efficient way to do it, what they do is truck it between, it might be sulfuric acid or all sorts of chemicals. But anyway, that will get resolved in time. Now we're going to go into the BP service station here, and we're going to stop for a couple of reasons. One is I need a comfort break, and the other one is that I need a coffee. And I'm sure you too do too, so you might want to just take a break and grab yourself a coffee. So here we are, back in a minute. So we'll now head off to Challenger Beach and take in a little bit more of the secondary industrial area that I've spoken about as being one of the synergies. All right. So you see the big transmission corridor, power lines, gives you an indication of the sort of energy that's coming out of the industrial area, and that services a lot of the southwestern grid, Swiss. All right, now we've got Alcoa Alumina Refinery on the left. It's one of 3 refineries that Alcoa has in this region, although there's one here and there's 2 others around. The bushland you can see directly here is called Mount Brown. That's a regional park, environmental regional park. One of the roads that was planned to service the new port in Kwinana, and this is going back 15 years, was Rowley Road. And Rowley Road was essentially another freight corridor from the coast to the Tonkin Highway, which is about 12 kilometres east of here. So it was the orientation for that was on the other side of this little bit of bush and these tanks that are through here. That's not going to happen now. Ankertel Road will be the freight route. So passing Alcoa, you can see directly ahead of us the coast, and we are going in about 500 metres to take a turn to the left to take us down onto the coast. We will get a better look at the Australian Marine Complex, and that's where that big blue shed's part of. That's the Submarine shed, brand new. Interestingly, Mount Brown on our right, there used to be houses that were on there. That used to be a township, and it was a bit like Kwinana Beach township. It was demolished in the 60s, I think it was, or 70s, and it became the recipient of a firing range from offshore. So the ships would fire into there. And a bit of local knowledge: the local fire brigade, volunteer fire brigades, won't go up onto Mount Brown if it's on fire because of the unexploded ordnance. Now we're heading down to Challenger Beach, and we'll stop here before we go into the water. So what can we see? Well, to the south is the Alcoa export jetty for alumina, and there's a ship that's quite heavily loaded there. We can see a couple of those tugboats again. They're heading north up to Fremantle, and we can see the Australian Marine Complex on my hard right. What I'd like you to observe is the amount of reclamation you can see. So it juts out a long way into the water. When I spoke about the AMC needing to expand and defence industry needing a place to expand into, this is it, from the Alcoa jetty all the way to the Australian Marine Complex. There's essentially no seagrass along here, right out to the channel, which is a fair way out. What I reckon should happen is that the dock for the AMC and defence industry is floating and it's offshore. That means, and it's pinned, of course, floating and pinned, but it's directly connected to the reclamation for the new port in Kwinana when it happens, and that preserves this public beach and the limestone cliffs that you can see all the way down there. So we've got the cliffs, the beach, and then more beach, and it's all part of the Belia Regional Park, which is we were looking at before with Mount Brown. So that's quite an extensive regional park. So there's an elegant solution that preserves this public beach, and it has, if it was floating pinned to the seabed, it has no impact on the coastal processes. And like I said, there's no seagrass here. So there's some interesting little shacks along here that you can see. Again, to my heart, we're going to drive through there, and I'll give you a talk about what they are. Once again, on our way. So we'll go through the Coburn shacks, as they are called. They were holiday homes many, many years ago when Rockingham and Kwinana were a long way from the metropolitan area in Perth. So these were holiday homes. I consider them to be inappropriate for being located in the industrial core, and we are in the industrial core. These are managed for the state government by the city of Coburn. They have a lease, 5-year leases. They're into their second lease, and I think they've got 2 years to go. There's people that have moved in here. They're not allowed to live here more than 120 days a year. But how's that policed? Well, it's an honesty system, so I don't put a lot of strength in that. And right over here is obviously a place that's permanently occupied. Now I know that there's several places that are permanently occupied. Here's another one. And some of them are rented to fly in, fly out workers to live here. Why is it not appropriate for these to be in the industrial area? Well, it's not safe, and there are emissions to contend with. If the Kwinana Beach Township, which I spoke about really early on, and I'm going to speak about the Hope Valley Township and the Wattleup Townships, both of which were demolished within the last 15 to 20 years because they're too close to industry. Why is it that these shacks are allowed to be here when they're too close to industry? I don't think it's very well policed by the city of Coburn. There is the opportunity to be able to purchase these. You see them advertised for sale sometimes. They don't have any ablution servicing. That's done in communal ablution blocks. So I don't know, it's a really difficult one, and they are in conflict with the proposed port in Kwinana. I find it unbelievable that there's one of the ablution blocks just here, just about to pass it. Unbelievable that new ones are being permitted by the City of Coburn. If we look straight ahead, we can see the big blue building and the extent of the reclamation. So it's quite wide. But these limestone cliffs are part of the Belia Regional Park and rightly should be preserved. This vegetation here is part of the Belia Regional Park as well, and again, rightly should be preserved. And we can get around the need to remove those by having the floating system offshore. So we'll head on our way back through here. Obviously there's one here. See the yellow buoy that we're just passing, the big yellow buoy? That belongs to the Department of Transport and is very expensive. I don't know how it got there, but it's there. And again, we can see some shacks that are probably permanently in use. I don't usually go too slow through here because some of the people don't like me very much. But anyway, we've got some lovely shacks here. Most of them have got solar panels on the roofs, which indicates people are living here longer than they should. And over here we have the lovely Lockwood number, and a little bit further along we have the lovely Brick Veneer number, and of course another one where I'm pretty sure somebody lives there permanently. So we'll get out of here before they realise I'm here again. And we'll head up to the Australian Marine Complex, the AMC. There's another set of their communal ablutions there. Okay, right, we're off. Now, the Australian Marine Complex was set up under the Gallop government many years ago, state government, and it's a case of a state government taking a risk, going out on a limb and building a facility, infrastructure. And so it was called the Australian Marine Complex. It's a case of build it and they will come. Well, that was the punt. The Gallop government was widely criticised for it initially, but the critics would call it a white elephant, but it's anything but that. It was a terrific decision, and it's a great example of where governments have a role in facilitating industrial growth by providing the basic infrastructure. And the AMC is an absolutely perfect example of that. So much so now that it's completely full and needs to expand. And over this direction, we can see the extent of the reclamation that the AMC sits on. So what goes on here? Well, the shipbuilding, and this great big blue building here, enormous building, will have ships built in it. There's very advanced engineering, subsea engineering, wellheads, undersea compressors, pipeline technology. A lot of that is done in here, and it's very advanced. Barges of kit for mine sites are imported on barges into here, and they are loaded onto big trucks for high and wide loads, which are sent out into the mining regions for installation. There are calls to have more room for the AMC to expand into, and for the defence industry to start up. So there is a very strong argument for the Australian Marine Complex to expand. Literally the only place it can expand is southwards offshore, which is the direction we've come from. So we'll take a left hand into the AMC now, and I'll just give you a quick tour through there, and then we'll head out again. We can't go onto any of the sites because of restrictions, but we can certainly drive through. So my key performance indicator for how well the AMC is doing is how many cars are parked on the verge. For many years, in the early days, you couldn't get a park anywhere. It was absolutely full. And then for several years, when we had the last downturn, no cars anywhere. But now they're coming back. So this place is really starting to get going again now. There's a lot of activity. There's a couple of big sites left. This one is now under construction, which is great to see. They're just assembling the kit to start building whatever it is that they're going to build. Again, you can see the scale of the Civmec building here and the scale of the operations. To the left, straight ahead of us, and to the right. This is a real success story. The red and white building over there is Matrix Engineering. They are a West Australian company, very, very advanced undersea technology that they're manufacturing. Over here is the Australian Submarine Corps, and if you look really carefully, you might even see a submarine that's extending out of the building at the moment. There's a floating dock in here to my hard left. You may be able to see that at some stage. That's a dock where the ship drives in, and it then floats up, and then it goes on rails. Here comes a high wide load passing us right now, heading up to the north somewhere, an oversized load. It looks like a very interesting bit of kit. Directly ahead there's some Navy ships and a submarine over there that you can see. So this is getting quite busy now. There's about 7 or 8 Navy ships that are up on the hard stand, and they're up for major maintenance, refitting. They might be changing an engine out or doing some sort of major work on it. The big building on our left is on railway lines and can move over towards the water, and I haven't seen it move too much, but it's quite a big effort to do that, but it does. Now on this downward side here, again, there are lots of Navy ships that you'll see, and they're all under major refitting work as well. So the Australian Marine Complex in the suburb of Henderson, it's on the map that I gave you earlier, is getting going again, and is very important to the Australian economy, and as the defence industry expands, there will be major expansion in this area. We're almost to the very north of the buffer zone now, and we're going to turn right just up here, but beyond that is the Water Corporation's Woodman Point Wastewater Treatment Plant. It's where the water that I talked about from the QWEP, the Kwinana Wastewater Reclamation Plant, comes from. So we've got all this way north, and that's where that water comes from on its journey out to the back of Garden Island. Secondary treated water, by the way. Now, directly ahead of us now, you'll see a tower. That's Coburn Cement's lime production facility, and is essential for industry. Alcoa wouldn't be here in this area if it wasn't for the production of lime locally. So very important in the symbiosis space. I've spoken about the buffer before and some constraints. So this is in the city of Coburn. This part, the governance, local government governance of the Western Trade Coast is complex. We have 3 local governments. One has a long history, long association with industry, and gets industry. 2 of them are problematic for industry. The 2 that are problematic, both in some way are tending to support the rezoning of land that currently ensures residential development can't get too close, rezoning it to accommodate urban housing. So that, as I said right at the beginning, is a really big problem for industry, fundamental problem for industry, and state governments over the years have and their supporting departments have failed to protect the buffer zone. The buffer zone is essential infrastructure for industry. We're trying again to have it preserved. The approach that we're using is trying to have it preserved with a special planning tool called a special control area, and that's currently in with the WA Planning Commission. It's a transparent, thorough process, and it is underway. We don't know how successful it's going to be. The buffer zone currently as it stands is big enough, but if it's starting to get whittled away by property developers looking for more and more marginal land for residential development, then we've got a problem. And I believe that this government will take us in the right direction to have that problem solved. We're now heading southwards on Stock Road. Notice that it's dual lane in each direction, and it's taking us, it transfers from Stock Road right now to Rockingham Road. And we're going through the suburb of Wattleup. Wattleup is the blue area on the map that I gave you earlier on. And there's quite a story to be told in here. Basically, it's undeveloped as far as industry goes, industrial uses go. And so it presents amazing opportunity for future industrial land. This dual carriageway goes all the way to Rockingham, and we've been right at the end of it at the beginning of this tour. So it's very long. It's got the right growth characteristics to be able to accommodate a lot more traffic. And as we travel south on Rockingham Road, you'll see in the distance the great big huge blue and white shed for Civmec that we saw before, and it's over here. These trees you see here on the right, that's the Belia Regional Park. So you can see that that's actually quite extensive. Now, as we come over the crest of the hill, I want you to start looking at the characteristics of the land that you see. And bear in mind, once you get about another 600 or 800 metres along, it used to be houses. It was the township of Wattleup. And the government of the day created legislation to begin a process to ultimately have this land zoned for industry. And nothing has happened since, except that the houses were compulsorily acquired and raised, flattened. So when we look over here to the left, look at the contours. Look how the land slopes up to the east. Look at the different building platforms. So there's been a lot of earthworks go on. It's all at different levels. Different uses. Here we've got caravan and boat storage. And then we go around and there's pretty much nothing from about here on. Imagine that this land is going to be the next expansion of the heavy industrial core, which, remember, I said was pretty much built out. There's not much, if any, there's no large lots left in the industrial core, but all of this area through here could be transformed into that industrial land. It's going to take a fair bit of work though, and lateral thinking. And what I mean by this is that, okay, Rockingham Road, if we make this at level 0, we're going to go up to the east. If this is level 0, you'll see ahead of us is a ridge, and along that ridge is a railway line. It's the railway line that takes the container trade or rail freight from Kwinana to Fremantle, or vice versa. If we build the Ankertel Road as the freight route, and it has the railway line through the middle of it, or a freight corridor 4-rail through the middle of it, then this rail line would be obsolete. So we're now almost 15 metres. I'm just going to park on the side of the road here and talk about what might happen here. But we're 15 metres above Rockingham Road. Most people, when they do an industrial or any subdivision, they will cut to fill, which means any extra fill material they put in the holes, or any extra. So they do the cut to fill so that it's flat. So you don't import material and you don't export material. That's what most people would think would happen here. What we need to do is think differently. If the railway lines only has a limited future, why don't we? And Perth is running out of fill material, so that's sand and limestone, crushed limestone and limestone rock. So we're sitting on 15 metres of quarryable, vertically 15 metres of quarryable resource. And it would be a crime to use that as cut to fill to make an industrial subdivision. What I say is that we should start at the southern portion of that blue on your map, the southern portion, and use that as a quarrying face at 0 level, same as the Rockingham Road, and start quarrying northwards all the way through here over 20 years. This ridge is 15 metres above Rockingham Road. The next ridge is 30, or just about 30 metres above Rockingham Road. So how does all that work? Well, it's really complex. This side of the railway line, all of the land is owned by the state government when the houses were bought and raised. The other side of the railway line is private holding, so they're in 2 to 5 hectare lot sizes. So whoever takes this on has to have the financial grunt to be able to acquire or do JVs with those existing landowners. And there's wonderful opportunities for those landowners to do really well out of this quarrying exercise, because remember, there's royalties. So royalties would go to the state government, just like mining royalties would. The property, the industrial property developer sells the fill material, and as the quarry face moves northwards, the land that's left over is ready to market heavy industrial land, serviced. Now, if we look around at this point, what do we see? What are the land uses? Well, there's containers stored over there. I can see some containers stored over there. I know there's lots of quarries, but it gets worse. I'll just let this truck go past and we'll follow it up to the next ridge. But have a look around as we go. Looking to the right, I can see container storage. I can see rubble being recycled. Looking to the left, I can see a market garden. This used to be market gardening all the way through. Now, on our right is a little vineyard and a very traditional Italian house. The old guy that lives in there uses these grapes for his grappa. And he said he'd give me a cutting or two at some stage, which will be quite good. Now, again, keep looking at what's around, left and right. Now we've got truck storage on a platform. Where are the environmental controls if there's a diesel spill? There aren't any. If this was permanent, and here's some isotainer storage, which is the dangerous chemicals. It's all higgledy-piggledy, all over the place. To my right is a quarry. The floor of that quarry is 15 metres above Rockingham Road, and as we approach this ridge, remember I said we're 30 metres, here's some more truck storage. It's just diabolical. But what this doesn't say to me it's a problem. This says it's a fabulous opportunity. So if you are an industrial property developer with a big long-term project in mind, this is it. We will just pull over again after we get out of the way of this truck. Now, just before we move out of here, I want you to take a look to the left at this building. The structure of it is actually literally sea containers with a roof on it, and they've cut window holes in it. I don't know what the town planning behind that is. I don't know what it's for, but I've started calling it Lego Land for what it's worth. Okay, so we're travelling east towards the Kwinana Freeway. It's a fair way off yet, say 4 kilometres. This land is all still part of the buffer zone. Now, there are residential property developers who would love to get their hands on this land a little bit further east of here. And Kwinana Industries Council, for the last 9 years of my time in this job, I have been fighting to resist that. But they're a very strong lobbying group, and they take a lot of work to resist. So we're going to move now to head south. When we're looking south, you can see the residue storage, the orange area. That's Alcoa's residue storage area, and that's important. That's the red on the map that I gave you. Now, this land right across to the Kwinana Freeway, which is probably 3 kilometres, maybe, yeah, 3 kilometres, maybe a bit less, is in the sights of 2 property developers for residential development. I've seen the plans which show houses right up to here. It's very constrained land. Now, on this side, on the left, is a beautiful wetland, and if you look carefully, you'll see a little man in a boat fishing. Well, if you think that's what it is, you've been caught. It's actually a mannequin that's fishing there, and somebody's got a good sense of humour. I swear I didn't put it there myself. So we've got a little bit of horticultural use through here. As we get further in, you'll see some market gardens. Now, I want you to think about this area. We've just come off the east-west road, which would be Rowley Road, which would be a freight link, linking Rockingham Road with the Kwinana Freeway. Kwinana Freeway is just over that ridge. Ahead of us, a couple of kilometres, will be the southern boundary of this area, Ankertel Road, a major freight route. We've got the freeway, Kwinana Freeway on that side. Overhead, we've got massive pylons, electricity pylons, transmission lines. You can't build under that, and who'd want to live near it anyway? And then immediately on our right is the Alcoa residue storage area, the toe of the residue storage area. So it is a really constrained piece of ground. But there's 2 residential property developers that want to turn this into housing, and I reckon they've got rocks in their head. The Department of Health says, as a requirement, if this happens, that any residential titles created here shall have a notification on them which says to be aware of the health or amenity impacts of industrial dust. So they're flagging their concerns, yet these property developers seem to be getting a really good run at it. Now, there's a statutory process in place to determine what this area should be used for, and I'm hoping that it'll be a transparent process. It seems like it's heading down that path, but I know how influential these property developers can be. Having said that, if this land, because if we get the new port, well, we know we're going to at some stage, and we're going to get industrial development through Latitude 32. So, and Lithium Valley is rapidly taking off in the industrial area. It's going to need more room, like the core needs more room. This area through here could be levelled off, quarried, etc., and transformed into a new industrial area. And for those people from Perth, like Canning Vale. So Canning Vale is a mixed-use light industrial area, primarily set up to service the port. So that's container storage, truck maintenance, marshalling, you name it, that sort of thing. All of that could happen through here. And these residents on my right who think that their best option is for the property developers to get urban zoning on this land, would, in my view, do far better to get together and jointly fund a study, a planning approval process to have their land zoned for light or special industry. And what that would mean for them is that they would, in all likeliness, achieve a much better property value. One of the laws of property ownership and investing is the person who holds the title when the value of the land is lifted makes a paper profit, crystallised when the land is sold. So they would be far better sitting on light or special industrial land today rather than the rural zoning that they have. But you know, that's their call, and I'll be putting that perspective through that statutory planning process. Now we're on Anketel Road here. Anketel Road will be, as I've said before, the major freight route into and out of the port and join about 10 kilometres to the east to Tonkin Highway. Imagine this road as 2 lanes going west, and further over there 2 lanes going east, with a corridor for 2-way rail down the middle. And this would be like the freight freeway into the new port. So Westport have recognised this in their planning, the planners for the port. They've recognised this, and I believe the statutory planners, the land use planners in the Department for Planning are now getting planning controls in place to preserve the reservation of this road, this critically important road. So we're getting closer and closer to the heavy industrial core now. The Alcoa residue storage area up to our right is still building that residue storage area up higher. It goes to, I think, 65 metres in height, but there's room for the corridor through here. This is already quite a busy industrial road, but the way that it needs to be set up through the Westport process and the freeway style that I talked about will enable trucks from the port to get their load, to travel eastwards to the Tonkin Highway, and then without hitting a traffic light at all, going right through to Kewdale, no traffic lights. All of the roads intersections are grade separated, so one over, one under. This is so critical for Perth's future transport needs that it has just got to happen. So, having harped on that point a fair bit, what we're going to do now is head north again, a little bit north again at this roundabout, and traverse up to the Hope Valley Industrial Area. The Hope Valley Industrial Area is part of the third symbiosis type that I talked about. Now this land to our left is in private ownership. It's owned rural. 18 months ago, maybe 2 years, on one of these tours, I conducted it for an international company, large, that was wanting to produce lithium battery cells. They really liked the look of this block. They needed about 60 hectares. I think this is 65 hectares. And it was not zoned industry then, and it's still not zoned industry. But it was going to take too long, and the structure planning hadn't been adequately done. So they went away. They built their battery cell manufacturing plant somewhere in Malaysia, I believe. We lost that opportunity. But we don't want to lose another opportunity. When I spoke about the quarrying, so if you look at your map on the southern end of the blue, that's where we are now. So the quarrying would start here, and it would go all the way north to the other, that road that we drove up and we stopped at where the railway line was, quarrying all the way north, leaving heavy industrial land ready to market in its wake. So in this area, it's pocked with a lot of old quarries, and it's not, if you look at it from the area, you Google Earth it or whatever, you'll see that. There's a lot of old quarries near. Yes, there's some quite nice environmental areas, and we're just about to pass through a wetland called Long Swamp. It's not in particularly good condition, but it could come back, and it doesn't need to be removed. It should be enhanced. And as this industrial area develops, it could be enhanced as part of the development conditions. Now we go around Long Swamp, we're going to come into an industrial estate called Flinders Estate. It's up to our left at the moment. It's on a hill, and that hill used to be the Hope Valley Township site. The township, at the same time as the Wattleup Township, was bought out, compulsorily acquired, bought out by the state government and raised for industrial development, remembering that these communities were living too close to industry. Now, I'm going to, before we go up into the Flinders Estate, which is up to our left now, I'm going to go into the Hope Valley industrial area. Just quickly, you see, directly ahead of us is a big green shed, huge shed. There's several of those. Remember I talked about the kit, the construction kit for Tianchi Lithium? That's where it was built, principally out of that shed, and transported all the way to its site in the industrial core. There's 3 of those sheds there. They're actually making Pacific Navy boats at the moment. And the other big green sheds up here are the Pacific Industrial. Also a lot of big plants made from there, and you can see a large number of big, huge white storage tanks. They are fabricated in these sheds here, and we're just going to turn around and get ourselves out of this industrial area. So there's quite a lot of advanced fabrication and manufacturing going on in here, as well as advanced engineering. So the specialist engineering workshops that service the complex plant and equipment in the industrial area, many of them are located here. There's galvanizers. Further up here there's all type engineering, which is very advanced plant maintenance engineering. So there's all type up there. So we'll move out of here. Look, this area is very traditional, and then we're going to head up to the Flinders Industrial Estate, which you can see up on the hill there here. So why am I harping on about it being a hill, you might ask? Well, the answer will come. Be patient. But I'd like you to note, to have a think about what you notice about a subdivision on a hill. What is the issues? What are the issues? Well, the first issue is that there's retaining walls, and some of them are quite extensive. And if we have retaining walls, that means the site costs are much higher. It means that trucks with containers and high wide loads, or forklifts with balanced loads, or cranes, it's not ideal. It's less than 100% safe. It's challenging loading trucks and cranes working on hills. It didn't need to be on a hill, but there's a reason that it is, and it's the reason that I go to great pains to explain on every single tour that I do. Now, some may dislike this. Too bad. So the reason the subdivision's on a hill is because there was about 20 years ago, when the township was here, the then Department of Fire and Emergency Services built a fire station, and that fire station is still here today. It served the Hope Valley and Wattleup area and the industrial area in Kwinana. No problem with that. But the problem is that government departments not talking to each other. So we have a brand new fire station in an area that the state government's industrial land agency is going to build a industrial subdivision on. So there's the fire station. And because they weren't talking to each other, it was too embarrassing, didn't want to acknowledge that the fire station was built without the knowledge of the land developer, and vice versa. It was agreed the fire station would stay and the subdivision would be built on the existing terrain, the hill. So that's why, to this day, this subdivision has lots of retaining walls and has been very slow because it's expensive. But worse still, we're driving on probably, 14 meters vertical height of land resource that should have been quarried and sold. Probably would have paid for the subdivision, but no. Let's keep it under the surface. We'll just build this and cop it sweet. So I tell everyone, including ministers of the state, and it's a true story. Now look at the size of this retaining wall, and look at the driveway. We've got some fire engines here. We'll just go around them. They are rolling out hoses because the fire station's up on the hill. They're just unrolling. But you saw the driveway back there, how steep that was. Imagine getting a truck with containers on it going up that hill. It's not ideal, let's just say. So here we have the quarrying, but it's cut to fill, still going on. So these edges will all have retaining walls on them. Who pays? Well, the industrial tenant or future landowner will pay through the site costs. These blocks are more expensive than they need to be because of this approach, because of the fire station existence. Anyway, I've had my rant, so we'll carry on. These sites are still filling up, albeit they've taken a very long time to fill up, but they still are, slowly but surely. Frio Cranes, they are a major supplier of heavy plant into the industrial area and other parts of Perth. They've only recently moved here. It's a pretty good spot actually for them. There are quite a few industrial companies that have moved into other industrial areas because of the price, as well as there's two main industrial areas, the Jandakot Airport and the Perth International Airport. They had a lot of land around them, federal land, and that land was much cheaper, and the town planning associated with that was much easier because it was federal land. So our planning system, sorry folks, is pretty complex if it's state land. Now that's the fourth. I'm referring to the fourth type of synergy, the governance synergy. We need to get our planning system much simpler than what it is. We need to get government departments talking properly to each other, and there's too much withholding of information, not sharing of plans. There is not and never has been a strategic plan for the development of the Western to guide the development of the Western Trade Coast. That's a problem. Now, look, cutting away directly ahead, the cranes. That's the waste to energy plant, and the power pylons above us. That is the pylon I pointed out to say where Ankertel Road joined Rockingham Road. This is that same intersection. So the way I'd see it working is Rockingham Road is lowered somewhat, and Ankertel Road goes over the top, straight down into the industrial area. So back to the governance synergy. There's a way through this. You heard me speak about the 3 local governments that we have. They've got their own cultures, their own priorities. Nothing wrong with that. That's what they do. But they're different. We need one over the whole thing. It would be really good if we had an entity, maybe called the Western Trade Coast Development Authority, and it was a government entity with many private sector brains running it, and it would be responsible for everything essentially from road maintenance to international business development and attraction. So it would encompass everything. The Western Trade Coast Development Authority. This is what needs to happen in this industrial area. It would create a strategic plan, and it would do joint ventures. It would find an industrial land developer to work in the Wattle-up area, joint venture partnership, to bring that land on quicker. It's too big and too complex for the current situation to be able to handle. So that needs to change, and the only way for that to change, pipeline governance I spoke about, these things. So the governance leg of the chair is the weakest leg. We need to strengthen it, and in my 12 and a bit years in this job, I have seen the governance for the Western Trade Coast, although it wasn't called that way back then, get more complex, more cumbersome, more difficult to deal with, less welcoming of industry. So part of that development authority would be doing the concierge role for assisting those new governments to get through the statutory process, those new industries to get through the statutory processes. And we've got an election coming up here in the not too distant future, so we will be putting that up as a proposal. So it would help to run the project for the new port whenever that happens, transitioning whenever that happens. And there are a number of big projects that it could facilitate. Remember I said the AMC was successful, a really good example of build it and they will come, and a government doing that, of the day doing that. Well, that's the facilitation of that industrial development is what the Western Trade Coast Development Authority could do. And I'm really hopeful, very, very hopeful, that that's going to occur. Now, we're taking a bit of a side track here. I wanted to show you some of the higher level views down over the industrial area. So I've just done something I don't usually do on the tour, but I'm doing that this time to give you a view of the extent of it. But just to finish on the governance, I don't want this to sound negative, because there's a lot of good people in government, in the government departments, but they are process driven. They have to be. Processes generate new processes, and so processes beget processes. So we've now got complexity building on complexity. We need to get in and cut it right back so that industries can get approvals quickly, that each industry that comes into this industrial area that we're looking at each one of them doesn't need to go and get a flora and fauna plan, doesn't need to go and do a bushfire management plan. There's so many plans that each industry that comes in has to do, and it's just totally inefficient, but the process says they have to be done. So the Development Authority would have all of those plans, and so Covalent coming in, for example, would be the condition would be to do a critter relocation plan. Well, here's the plan, and you just got it. Covalent just has to say yes, I agree. It's as simple as that. Rather than consultants getting rich by doing these same plans all over the place, the plethora of them, they all cost $30,000 or $40,000 each. It's a cost that adds up for industries coming into the industrial area. So let's get that simplified. Let's get it really simple so we're facilitating that industrial development. Now we're heading north on Rockingham Road. You'll see some views to the left of some of the activity going on in the industrial area. There's quite a bit happening now, and that's why the industrial land availability has been chewed up of late. And as I've said, the new industrial area expansion of the core can be in that latitude 32 area. It's taking a fair bit of work to convince the powers that be that in government that should be the case, but it's the only place that the core can expand to. I'm pretty confident that will be the result, and it'll be the right result. Again, Quanada Motorplex up on our right hand side. That's a drag strip, and the circuit racing, like I said earlier, that needs to go somewhere else because it's a constraint on industry. It's pretty much not working that well anymore, and I'm sure it could be better marketed in an area that had better public transport access, and there are other areas that are chasing motorsports. If it were given up, then that creates quite a big industrial area for new industries coming in, heavy industries coming in. Just as an interim, we're going to head right across back on Ankertel Road for about 4 kilometres. So I'm just going to talk about renewable energy and Lithium Valley and so forth. Green hydrogen, for example. So I'm speaking with 2 companies that are in the business of delivering wind turbines, huge wind turbines. We're talking about sites with them in the industrial core, and Development WA are in that conversation and are very enthusiastic about it too, I might add, which is great. So there are plenty of sites. I'm talking with one in particular company that's looking for large industrial roofs to lease for solar panels. I think we will end up with quite a strong renewable energy base in the industrial area. Now, why is that important? Well, the people, the decision makers in Europe, in the European Union that I and others have been talking to, and the Germans have been talking to about this, they're looking to Lithium Valley as an alternative to the pretty much everything that goes into electric vehicle batteries now comes out of China, right? Well, they want to diversify that. 2 baskets for the eggs to be split amongst. We've got the whole suite of minerals and resources that are needed. We can be manufacturing them here, but the world is demanding, the European world and Americans are demanding production of the batteries with the materials in the supply chain into them being derived through the use of renewable energy, 100% renewable energy. So that's why wind turbines, solar panels. I'm even talking to a company that's looking at geothermal power in this area. Yeah. Oh, and look, there's lots, all the trucks, they're coming from all directions, and so this is one very busy roundabout. I think I can see about 5 of them at the moment. So anyway, finishing off on the renewable energy, gas to natural gas to gasoline, hydrogen energy, electricity from wind turbines, from solar panels. We're getting battery cell manufacturing. This whole Lithium Valley thing could be world renowned for being powered by 100% renewable energy. And remember, the 2 waste to energy plants are producing power, electricity, and it is classified as renewable. Now we're going over a ridge. Down in this valley, as we head back to the township of Kwinana, is I think it's about 400 hectares of land that used to be an agricultural research station. It's owned by the government, and I reckon this land could be made available for a food processing industry. We have a workforce just over the next ridge in Medina. This is the township of Kwinana, within walking distance. So businesses that do not need to be making emissions. They don't have odours, they don't have to make noise, there's no dangerous chemicals, dangerous goods, there's no stacks. This is ideal for food production and preparation. For export, it might be washing carrots, preparing carrots or potatoes. It could be making noodles. We have vast acreage of wheat and knowledge, and renewable energy now. So why don't we make noodles for Asia from here? We could be exporting 100,000 shipping containers of noodles. We could make all of that here. I've been injecting those thoughts into the various planning processes. But if we get a development authority, these sorts of ideas can start to get legs, because if they make financial sense, commercial sense, the authority will go out, find and market, find the people who want to do that, and off we go. But we need the port here as well. So that's pretty much the end of the industrial part of the tour. We're just driving back down to the office in where I work in Quinana. I hope you found it all very informative. As I say, this is about the 220th tour I've done over the 3 years I've been doing them. The number of tours seems to have, over the last 12 to 18 months, increased dramatically. The people that have taken these tours tend to be individuals who are looking to build their businesses here, evaluating whether they should come here or go somewhere else in Australia, in Western Australia, and there are other industrial areas. Those industrial areas don't have the synergies that this industrial area has. They don't have the stable workforce. I didn't speak about the 30,000 workers too much, about the skilled and experienced workforce synergy. 30,000 workers attribute their employment to this industrial area. They're well skilled. They don't like moving away from the area because their families are here. They sleep in their own bed when they're not on shift. Their kids go to school in this region. 2/3 of those workers live within 15 kilometres of where they work, and so they're very loyal to industry. These are industry loyal communities around here, and we attribute a lot of our time and resources to a partnership we have with the 17 high schools in this region. Jump on our website and have a look under the education tab. You will see the sort of work we do. We're putting something like 250 high school kids through our courses, which are designed to show them that they can have careers in industry. So we're growing the new workforce for industry. So in concluding, I was talking about the sorts of people that have taken the tours, individuals, but there's been major investment companies, there's been companies that are strategic port owners around the world, from the Northern Hemisphere. They are looking for projects to invest in. I've had Australian superannuation company representatives on this tour. I've had state, federal and local elected politicians and bureaucrats. You name it. I've had them on these tours. They're going to continue to operate, and I'm doing them because I want to promote the Western Trade Coast and Western Australia in a coordinated way for the economic expansion of the state. And if we can attract the industries to come into here that fit within that set of synergies, they are going to do a lot better on an internationally competitive basis. So we're going back up the driveway now to the office. My voice has just about run out. Excuse me. And essentially we are done. That's better. Thanks very much for taking the tour with me today. It's been a pleasure hosting you. If you'd like to share this video with friends or colleagues, please be my guest. And if you want the details, jump on our website and you can share those details as well. Thanks again. Hope you enjoyed.